Hi, this is Tim Santoni, and welcome to the Santoni Spotlight. Today, Teresa McQueen joins me. Teresa, thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, maybe give our viewers a little bit of sense of your company, your background, a little bit how you got to this point in your profession, so we have some context for the conversation.
Well, that's a long story. So I always introduce myself as the founder and principal attorney at Saffire Legal. I am a recovering litigator. So for the past, 15, 20 years or so, I worked at a small firm where I became a litigation partner and litigated employment law cases on behalf of plaintiffs. But because we were a small firm, we also did a little defense. My partner, Neil Pedersen, handled all the defense work. And I did that for quite a while and decided that I wanted to do something else. I thought that I could help employers after sitting through some pretty amazing depositions on the plaintiff side. It dawned on me that a lot of the problems that employers have and employees have, because it's kind of both, the communication, the way people were being treated, the way situations were being handled, really exacerbated most of the problems. And coupled with a lot of times, a lot of the intake calls I'd get from employees, you'd walk them through, they'd start complaining about this, they felt disrespected, there was a problem, I wasn't treated right. And oh, by the way, I think I was being discriminated against because it was always the moral wrong that really stuck. And in some cases in the litigations, it would be a problem because they could never get past the feeling that they were morally wronged somehow, even though it's not legally actionable. Mm-hmm. And I thought a lot about, what could I do? Is there a way to, if you could just stem the problem and go back and fix the communication, maybe it would be better. Terminating someone without trying to not let that anger, that frustration show that led you to that position. So I thought about what I could do. I thought, what am I good at? I thought, well, I'm good at public speaking. I enjoy that. I'm a good teacher. I like educating. And a few years before that, I was serving on the board of the Orange County Bar Association. And we had a speaker come in to talk to the board who was trained in business etiquette. And at the time I thought, that'll be really fun to do when I retire. But when I was thinking about how to change, how I could transition from being a litigator into something else and still retain the attorney part, it just fit. It was a great fit because it went along with already what I felt about if communications were improved, if there was more civility in the workplace, if the focus was on all of that it would stem problems. So I went and got certified as a business etiquette trainer as well. And in 2016, I left my law firm, my little safe nest. It was very hard, telling my partner he had to chuck me out because I really didn't want to go. And I started Saffire Legal. And that was in 2016, and it's been great. It's been people are really receptive to the idea of trying to stop problems before they turn into legal problems. It's been really successful.
So based on what you're saying, the perspective on the plaintiff side and working with those employers really helped you frame and it allows you to focus and give better counsel now, it sounds like, based on that experience. To that end, what are maybe the top one or two communication-related employment issues that you see come up time and time again that, if you were involved with the employer or with the HR, professional that you could help resolve or deal with?
A lot of it has to do with tone. And I do have a unique perspective. I think that's one of the interesting things because even though I was litigating on behalf of plaintiffs, strategizing on our defense and all of that, I was also advising employers on policies and procedures and practices. But a couple of instances I see over and over again occur on two major issues. One, disability in the workplace. That's always a problem. And overall terminations. So disability discriminations, a couple of the things that are always helpful is I always encourage HR professionals to take off that cape of frustration and, put a fresh set of eyes on as you look at each problem, because HR professionals, they see the worst all the time. And over a period of time, like everybody else, you start to form a bit of a thick layer when it comes to all of that.
Sure.
And so I really encourage people to sort of stop, take a breath, put all that aside, and really focus on this particular individual and evaluating this particular individual. Even though there might be a history and it might be exactly what you think it is, maybe they are a malingerer or something, but just take the time to look at them individually and pull back a little on the frustration. Because it's that short fuse, it's whatever it is that breaks the camel's back that is always the turning point. And from then on, it's the communications are tinged, the tone is different, and employees pick up on that. So my biggest thing is working with, I've had great employers who have gotten to that point and realized, okay, we need to take a breath. How we handle this? We think there's going to be an issue, so let's get ahead of it. It's my ideal client.
Sure.
And the terminations are just, there's nothing, it's very satisfying in your head to do the whole Johnny Paycheck thing, you're out of here, take this, but it doesn't work. It doesn't help because employees who are even terminated in a way that they still feel respected, it's done behind closed doors, their career wasn't trashed beforehand within the company, because that's what really hurts is that whole, they know it's coming. Right. All of a sudden their performance reviews go down. They can't do anything right. They're not meeting any goals. And then the final thing is everybody's in the room or it's done in public. It's that personal humiliation that they have a hard time getting over. That's why they want to go talk to an attorney. But I've had employers who take the time to say, to take those few minutes, to even when they're furious, to just treat that person with as much respect and as much civility as they can, professionalism, and protecting that ego as much as they can to send them off, hopefully not quite as morally damaged or upset as they could.
Yeah, and so to that point, I think that, again, it goes back to just overall treatment. People want to be treated well, and employers like to say that over time they get kind of frustrated with these same things that happen over and over again. I talk to HR professionals and like, oh, I know this is happening. They've already kind of laid the foundation for what they think is going to happen, whether it's accurate or not, right? But I think that what someone like yourself brings is the outside perspective because you're able to analyze just the facts and the evidence, the information there. As someone becomes more and more senior, are they more inclined to ask for help or less inclined to ask for help?
It depends. It really does depend. The entrepreneurial spirit is wonderful, and all of the things that got the entrepreneur to that position is the fact that they really didn't listen to a lot of people. And they did, they typically accomplished a lot without doing that. So depending on the size of the company and how they got there, there tends to be a little tug of war there and a grudging knowledge that, okay, we need to talk to you. Okay, what do you have to say? And all right. The larger the company, the bigger the company, the farther away from the very, very top, those senior people tend to know because they've already worked in that environment and they understand the value. And it's really helpful. And so there's less resistance there. I was thinking about an example of, I had a client the other day who, on a disability issue, had an issue with an employee, and they were very mad at the employee because the employee wouldn't take some forms and didn't want to cooperate when they needed to and didn't allow the employer to give them the information that they're required to by law. So the letter they were going to send, they said, can you just look this over before we send it out? I'm like, sure. And I looked at it and the tone was very, curt, very short. So I just took a few minutes and I just reworked it because I wasn't angry and I wasn't upset, and I got all the information they needed to get in there in a much lighter tone, a much more, laid back. Sure. And I got a response back from the client that said, thank you for that. I could see, in looking at the two, that the tone was sharper and it did make a lot of difference. So.
Sure. So that's a great example of a client you worked with recently. And you mentioned earlier a little bit about what your ideal client looks like. But maybe give us an example recently of a client you work with where you're able to kind of deal with communication-related issues, etiquette, that help with the overall HR and dealing with those conflicts in the business.
Right. I do a lot of that. My ideal client was actually one of the first clients I got after I left the litigation firm. And they had an issue. They felt that based on what had happened previously, that they were looking forward and envisioning a leave issue. And they wanted to know, what do we do? How do we handle it? because they'd had very little communication. It was one of those things where the employee was disciplined and went out on a leave and came back just before, just at the end of the leave, came back, and they knew it was going to be an issue. So we coached a lot about how do you communicate with this person? What can you require of them when they come back? And I was able to share with them that for some reason, it's always salespeople. And when salespeople...
Those darn salespeople, right?
I know, but I could see, I do see both sides. Salespeople are the lifeblood of a company, especially outside salespeople. And so when they leave, it sort of is this panic of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So you tend to see a lot of familiar scenarios wrapped around salespeople. And so I was able to share with them. They laid out their plan, which was typical. It's what every employer does. Well, we have to move into this territory, and now we're going to acquire this, that, and the other thing. So we were able to coach about, well, I think a better approach to that would be as few changes on that level as we can. And we talked about how to approach that, what it looked like overall. Talked about possible questions the employee might have when they come back and how to handle those questions, how to handle going forward. A lot of people think that, well, let me say it this way. You just have to be very cautious when someone comes back from a leave or anything like that. People feel like they can't hold someone to the same work standards. You can. It just has to be within the frame that they're working in when they're coming back into the work situation. So we talked, what does that look like and how do you approach that? And we talked about scripts. We really talked about how could you phrase this to say it better than that? Not telling them what to say, but possible ways to approach, many ways to approach the same subject.
Sure. Yeah, so I think that what I see a lot in the clients that we work with is there's a lot of times there's, obviously the prevention aspect would be huge, right? But they come to us after the fact. I don't know where we're at this year, but I know last year that there was nearly 100 new laws that impacted employers that were passed. Yeah. So it's almost impossible, no matter how senior someone is in the HR world, to not consult with an expert in it. And it sounds like businesses are constantly having to adapt how they communicate and deal with these things because the laws are changing. So it's a constant adaptation. So, how do you stay abreast of what's going on in the legal world and break it down in practical ways to business owners who don't care about the legal mumbo jumbo but need to know?
Not send them 5-page memos. That's what I try not to do. Although they do laugh whenever somebody asks me a question. Sometimes I'll like, well, can you make a call? And because I'm like, if I have to write this, you're not even going to want to read it. It's going to be so long. But I do. I think that the way I do it is there's lots of resources out there to stay on top of things, and I try to I try to keep my client list in mind, and if I see something, I'll try to send something out. And if not, just making sure, I think it's funny, most of the HR people that I work with are really good at, they know a lot, but they also know when they need backup, even though they have the answer.
Sure.
So I think that helps keep everybody abreast of what's going on, as long as somebody's not forging through on their own and thinking maybe I should get a little backup on something. And most of that, because they clue in anything to do with a protected classification, anything to do with what might be a termination that they think might get a little heated or something like that, unusual things that happen in the workplace, they'll tend to reach out and make that really easy.
Well, before we let you go, I know that you also have a radio show podcast that called Workplace Perspectives that you invited me on, which I appreciate very much, but maybe give a little bit of background and plug on that and how that came to be.
Oh, thanks. So Workplace Perspective, raising the bar at workplaces everywhere. We did have you on. Thank you for coming. It was a great show. We really enjoyed doing it. And the podcast grew out of more of that communication and just a way to get more information out there on both sides. So Saffire Legal, we're very much about both sides. I get calls from both employers and employees asking about situations. So I do get employees who actually call and want to know, hey, I think I'm having this issue with my employer. What do you think? How should I handle it? Because I don't litigate, they're not calls about, I want to sue my employer. Mm-hmm. We talk about whether or not there's anything there, but we also talk more about how to handle it and approach it. So that got me thinking, because I didn't want to do a podcast just for one voice or the other voice. So Workplace Perspective is about giving both sides of the coin. So we always try to have shows that offer information for both employers and employees on different topics.
That's great. So we'll definitely link up all of Teresa's information in the show notes below. We'll also provide links to Saffire Legal as well as the Workplace Perspectives show. If you have any questions for Teresa or myself, please leave them down in the show notes below. Teresa, thanks so much for taking time to come on the show.
Very
It's
much.
great.
I appreciate it.